Hello and welcome back to the VolReport Show. I'm Ryan Sylvia, joined by Noah Taylor, and we're coming off a trip to Gainesville. Just got back yesterday after we saw Tennessee fall 29-16 to Florida on the road. A disappointing game, a game that it felt like Tennessee was finally going to get over that hump in the swamp for the first time since 2003. Weren't able to get it done. So we're going to talk about that. Kind of put a bow on that Florida game, leave it in the past, and try to move forward, and then talk about the UTSA game coming up, Tennessee's second game at home this season after beating Austin Peay in week 2. So we have a packed show today. Let's jump right into it. Just talked about that Florida loss. Noah, I'm curious, when watching that game and now letting it kind of sit for 2 days now, what is the biggest issue on this team right now that needs to be corrected?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it starts with the offense, and I didn't think I would be saying that, in year 3 under the way the first 2 seasons of Josh Heupel's tenure have gone. More specifically to that Florida game, it was the offensive line right now. I think a week ago it was the connection between Joe Milton and the receivers. The run game was gelling. Big plays were open, not a lot, but they were open a little bit when they were there, and Tennessee went after them. But Saturday, they couldn't consistently establish a run game. Joe Milton looked better, in my opinion, but the offensive line didn't really give him time to develop a lot of plays. And the ones he did connect on were impressive. And then you had, obviously, the interception being one, a good example of the offensive line just not – being on the same page with him up front. I don't know if that's because Cooper Mays has been out, but, now we're going into week 4 without him playing. You'd like to think he will play soon. Probably, we have no word on that yet. He was on the sideline Saturday. He's been sidelined the last 2 weeks. And as far as we know, he's been out of practice the last 2 weeks. So, but at this point, it's kind of concerning, I guess, that they've had some time to be without Cooper, going back to training camp as well. And, for whatever reason, right now, the offensive line just isn't, kind of on the same page as the rest of the offense, and it showed Saturday night.
Yeah, that's my biggest issue right now is what Josh Heupel talked about during his Monday press conference, which is shooting themselves in the foot, errors that are unforced, whether that's penalties in the pre-snap, whether that's not making a tackle that needs to be made, whatever those issues are that are on yourself, that are not Florida doing it to you, but you putting yourself in a hole. I think that's what killed Tennessee on Saturday was so many drives that felt like they started 1st and 15 or 1st and 20, 2nd and 20. And you can't win football games when you're doing that. 10 penalties for Tennessee throughout the course of the game. And I think that was the main killer. People expected Florida to put up about as many points as they did. That wasn't a surprise. If you told me Tennessee scored less than 30 points in that football game, I probably would have agreed that they would lose. So it comes on that offensive end, but I think that we'll talk about Joe Milton next, but I thought he did good.
Yeah.
And I thought he did good enough. The issue was they were starting behind the 8 ball on seemingly every drive. Like I just said, let's talk about Joe Milton. How would you grade his performance? We both touched on it a little bit, but would you put the blame on him, or did he do a good enough job? Kind of what are your thoughts on Joe Milton through 3 weeks now?
Yeah, I think, in that Florida game, you just kind of said it perfectly. He was good enough. I think you could argue that the throw with the interception, him getting hit, affected it, but maybe it was still an ill-advised throw on him. But there were times in that game where he looked as good as he's looked all season. That first drive was kind of textbook. I think that was kind of what we expected out of him this season. The way they moved it so quickly downfield, hitting some open guys like Squirrel White getting behind the secondary. Brew McCoy, a guy that's played a lot of football that helped set that up. And then Ramel Keaton capping that drive so quickly on the road, making kind of a statement. I think that's what we expected Joe Milton and this Tennessee offense to look like this year. And in my opinion, the only reason Tennessee's in that game in the second half is because of Joe Milton and the way that he played. I don't see how, obviously getting a lot of unfair criticism on social media, what have you. I'm sure they're tuning that out, but I don't see how you could argue that any other quarterback on that roster could go in that game and make a difference. I thought Joe Milton played good enough. I don't know necessarily to win, but good enough to keep Tennessee in a game that, like you said earlier, they dug themselves in a hole. So it was concerning the first 2 weeks with the connection with the receivers. Again, some of that was on the receivers, some of that was on Joe. But as far as Saturday night goes, I would go with a B- because I do think that Tennessee is going into that fourth quarter with any kind of shot to win on the road because of the way Joe Milton was playing.
Yeah, I think that's fair. He has gotten a lot of criticism from the fan base recently about his level of play, but I mean, I don't know if Hendon Hooker just ruined everyone's kind of idea of what a good SEC quarterback is because of how good Hendon was. But Joe Milton's been really solid, or at least he was against Florida for the better part of that game. You talked about the interception. Yeah, he can't throw that ball. You need to do something else with it, whether it's just tuck it in, take the sack, throw it away earlier. Whatever it is, you can't just throw it out for grabs like he did while he gets hit. But throughout the course of the game, I thought that there was a lot of positives you could have taken away from his play. He hit on some big throws down the field. Squirrel White on that opening drive that you mentioned that ended up with another great throw to Ramel Keaton, or on a big third down, Dante Thornton up the seam. Joe Milton puts the ball on the money, or Brew McCoy at the end of the game, the final touchdown of the game, too little too late, but it was a really good throw. I don't think it was Joe's fault. Talking to a lot of other people, they don't seem to think it's Joe's fault. Talking to Josh Heupel today at the presser, he didn't seem to really think it was Joe's fault. He said there's a lot that he needs to improve on, and they understand that. But it wasn't like he sat up there and said, yeah, this one falls on Joe. He needs to be better. It was, no, Joe had a lot of areas that were really positive, but he also needs to grow. And I think that that's the correct answer there, is that he's been good but not great, and they need him to take that next step for sure. But I don't think it's fair to make him the scapegoat at this point in the season. But we've talked about the offense. We focused pretty much mainly on the offense so far. What about the defense? Tough start for them to begin this game. Ended up tightening up in the second half against the Florida team that didn't really do much offensively or even try to do much offensively in the second half, but they at least only held them to 3. What does this defense need to do to get back on track?
Yeah, I think I'll go with the low-hanging fruit here, but I'll go with the two obvious things from Saturday. That was, make tackles and get off the field on third down. It was definitely a step back for them, and there were times it looked like the defense that played in that South Carolina game a year ago. And it's not like Graham Mertz lit them up for 400 or 500 yards or anything like that, but he was efficient on third down. He hit some plays downfield when Tennessee really needed to get off the field that allowed them to extend some scoring drives there, and that's tough to come back from on the road. Also, the run game as well. I mean, the interception, I think, was a play that was one of the defining plays of the game. But Florida's touchdown drive to answer Tennessee's when Tennessee was up 7-0, the way that they held Florida early, forced the field goal, get partially blocked it or whatever happened there to keep the score 0-0 and then go down the way the offense did and score. And then Florida comes right back, and Trevor Etienne was going to get a first down, had the first down regardless on the run. But, man, who's to say that Kamal Hadden doesn't come up and make that tackle, that Florida gets anything out of that drive, because we saw the way the defense held before. So that was concerning, just things like that, some a lack of – I don't want to use the word lack of effort, but, it was just things that you could stop kind of early in that game that could have changed it, that being one of them on that run. So I think those are the two most glaring things, because early in the week, we saw early this season in the first 2 games, we saw how effective they've been at stopping the run. They did not do that very well Saturday night against 2 really good backs. And the deeper you get in league play, you're going to keep playing better backfields. And then again, we had some concerns about this secondary. I know you did, especially at corner going into this season. And that was kind of the first time we've really seen them kind of pay for their mistakes. And you're going to have a lot of games like that if those things aren't corrected.
Yeah, maybe not a lack of effort, but at least a lack of fundamentals from Tennessee's secondary, missing a lot of tackles, letting Etienne go for more yards than maybe he should have. And like you said, it was going to be a big run regardless, but you can stop them there at around midfield, and who knows what happens. They already missed a field goal. That extra point doesn't go in right after anyway. So clearly the special teams unit wasn't firing all cylinders for Florida. You might get that ball back up 7-0, and then it's a different story after you stop Florida twice. but that just didn't happen. Last thing I want to ask before we move on to talking about this UTSA game coming up on Saturday is we both had Tennessee at 10-2 heading into this season. Neither of us had Tennessee losing this game in our season predictions, though. So we've had 3 weeks to see 2-1 record. Are you sticking with 10-2? Is that going to fall? Maybe you got an 11-1. You think they figure it out? What does the season prediction look like for you, Noah, with 9 games left in this season?
Yeah, I know this isn't really answering your question. I'm kind of going back and forth on 9-3 and 8-4, and I'm leaning 8-4 right now. I think I said, I felt really confident about 10-2 at the beginning of the season, and I think we were on here, and I said that Florida game, which is obvious for anybody, that Florida game was going to tell us a lot. Tennessee, we felt was the better team, but playing on the road, didn't handle some road games well last year. How are they going to handle that game early in the season? And now we know our answer. They didn't handle it very well, and we're still seeing a lot of the issues we've seen the first three weeks. So that's a little bit concerning. And that loss leaves you very little room to get to your goals. That leaves you very little room for error to finish out the rest of the way, because I think the good news for Tennessee right now, and we talked about it on the drive back on Sunday from Gainesville, was this league is down. There's no doubt about that. I mean, you look at across the SEC and you see Georgia, the 2-time defending national champion. Yeah, I'm going to give them the edge in every game that they play, but they've looked human the last couple of weeks, and that could change by the time Tennessee plays them in November. Kentucky hasn't looked overly impressive. Alabama hasn't looked overly impressive. So the good news for Tennessee is there is a lot of winnable games on that schedule to still compete for the East and still get to what we thought they would be at. But right now, I'm going to have to see a lot of stuff corrected, and that starts with UTSA this week. So right now, I think I'm going to go 8-4 just because I just don't know at this point if those things are going to be drastically improved between now and South Carolina. The good news, again, is you got a really long stretch here at home against 3 teams, counting UTSA, but 2 SEC teams that I think you can absolutely beat. So that's the good news for Tennessee, but there's a lot that needs to be cleaned up to have 10-2 be a possibility still.
I'll agree with 8-4. I'll even give the 3 games I think they lose. I think they come out of this home stretch with all wins, and then they drop games to Alabama, Kentucky, and Georgia. And those were the 3 games I was most concerned about going into the season in terms of losses. And I believe in the season predictions we did ahead of the year, I had Georgia and Alabama being the 2 losses, but I'll throw in that Kentucky game as well now. Heupel obviously success over Kentucky so far, won in Lexington in year 1 and then blew them out at home. But it's concerning to see his struggles on the road so far in his career at Tennessee, and even dating back to UCF. And we've seen it a few times now where this team goes on the road in hostile environments and they don't communicate well, they don't respond well, and it ends up being a factor. And Lexington isn't going to be the Swamp, it's not going to be Athens, but it's not going to be an easy place to play. So I think Kentucky is a good enough team that they could give Tennessee some trouble, but I'll stick at 8-4 with those 3 losses right now. And you hit it as well. That Florida game, I think, told us a lot about this team, stuff that we didn't necessarily think heading into the season, but kind of some of those issues are starting to turn their ugly head now and show them to us. So 8-4, I think, is a year that would be a little underwhelming for Tennessee, and a little disappointing. But in the grand scheme of things, big picture, 8-4 in year 3 after 10-2 in year 2, and a lot of great talent coming and a lot of really good-looking young guys on the team right now, and Joshua Josephs, Arian Carter, Elijah Herring. That's just on the defensive end. Of course, Nico at quarterback, Squirrel White at receiver, Dylan Sampson at running back. You can go down the list of all that talent. I think that they'll be in good hands going forward still, even if this year does end up being slightly worse than expected. But let's talk about UTSA. I have a couple questions for you. We'll hit on them quickly. And kind of just go through our thoughts ahead of the matchup with the Roadrunners. Dylan Sampson didn't play at all against Florida. Dante Thornton didn't play at all in the first half, but kind of had a really solid third quarter before disappearing again. But 2 guys that were expected to be pretty decently big impactors for this team that haven't saw the field much. Who do you think has a better chance to contribute versus UTSA, Dylan Sampson or Dante Thornton?
I'm going to say Dante Thornton. And we got to see, like you said, got to see a little bit of him in that second half. And I think for the most part, but actually that may be the most we've seen him at all this year after, especially in a game where it was really critical to have some, get a drive going there in the third quarter. But I think, he had the big catch deep, maybe should have had two in that game. Pass interference, defensive pass interference call that wasn't called on the first deep throw to him by Joe Milton. But I think that was a good enough sample size for him to get more targets. Now, Squirrel also had a good start to that game as well. And I know they're both in the slot position, but they talked about it earlier in the season that he could play outside. I don't know where we'll see him on Saturday, but I think given the way he played in that second half and kind of helped get a drive going there, kind of sets him up to get the ball a little bit more here in this game. And I wouldn't count Dylan Sampson out either. I'm not even really super confident in Dante Thornton being more of a factor than Dylan Sampson, just because we know how good Dylan Sampson can be. I think what's holding me back now is just Josh Apple today saying he was a little bit nicked up. I don't know how much of that played a factor in him not getting on the field Saturday. You would think when you're trying to just build some kind of momentum on the road that you would just throw him out there to see if maybe he can break one for you. But I think at this point, Jalen Wright has done so well running the ball that there's really no point in going away from him. But yeah, we'll see. I like Dante Thornton right now, but I could definitely see Dylan Sampson also being a big contributor on Saturday.
I'll go with Dante as well, just because it's not like Jalen Wright's been bad at running back.
Yeah.
It's not like Jabari Small has been bad at running back. So you have that two-man punch, and you don't really need to very often go to that third guy. You want to get him touches because he's a good player on one hand, but also because you want to keep him satisfied until he's really that main guy at running back. You want to feed him a little bit, but the wide receivers have struggled a little bit this season, and Dante coming out in the third quarter, I think could prove to the coaching staff maybe a little bit more that he needs to see some snaps. And you talked about his versatility. We've only seen him at the slot so far, which has been interesting because all offseason they talked about how he could play outside. So we'll see if maybe he gets his first reps at the X or Z position against UTSA. But, I expect Squirrel White to get the start. I expect them to use him. I'm not saying Squirrel White's been bad, but I think that Dante's maybe starting to force the coaching staff's hand a little bit in terms of putting him on the field after that production against Florida. And this could be another good opportunity for him to kind of show his skill set off. But let's talk a little bit Joe Milton again. I just want to hear, what do you kind of project his stats to look like by the end of this UTSA game?
Maybe a little bit of what we saw against Florida. I think maybe I'm a little bit too positive. I do think that this could be a really good opportunity for him because I think there is something to build on from last Saturday. And I know it's tough to say that and really tough for Vol fans to try to find anything positive when you had a game like you mentioned at the beginning, the streak and all that. I know the team doesn't care about it, but that was a game you felt really good about going in, and now you're kind of left with more questions than answers than you had going into it. And I get that. But I think this is a really good opportunity for this team. It's a UTSA team at the beginning of the year that came in. Josh Hopp talked about it today. They're back-to-back conference champions. They've won a lot of games in a couple of years there. It was a game on some people's radar as a trap game for Tennessee before that emotional South Carolina game and in between that Florida game. Now you're coming off the Florida game with an unexpected loss, and I don't know if it looms larger, if it's more of a trap game now. I don't know how people are really viewing it, but I see it as a really good opportunity for Joe Milton to build off what he did in that second half. So I don't know specifically what he would have, but I see it similar to that stat line. And you would hope in this game, I didn't think I'd be saying it about UTSA and not Austin Peay, but you would hope in this game, this would be the one where maybe you have the opportunity to pull him in that second half and get some reps for Nico against a solid team.
For Milton's stat line, I'll go with about 220 through the air, maybe about 20 rushing, 2 touchdowns and no turnovers. And I think that would be positive and plenty to get Tennessee the win. I expect them to get the ground game going again. You see it all the time. Offense drives the ball down the field, maybe a big play, puts the ball inside the 5, and then they send it off to Jabari Small or Jalen Wright, and he gets credit for the touchdown. But I think Milton finds the end zone 2 times to some receivers or tight ends or even one of those swing passes that they've been doing. And I think that he takes care of the football, which I think is a big deal because he just has that one blip on the radar now of that interception against Florida in his career at Tennessee. And it was so avoidable, and one that he definitely is kicking himself for and absolutely wants back, because it's not like he made the wrong read. It's not like he put the ball in the wrong spot. He just made a dumb decision to let it loose, and he got hit and the ball just fluttered in the air. And I think that that's probably Joe Milton's biggest strength so far in his career at Tennessee, has been taking care of the ball. So I expect that to get back on track as he goes 200 plus, but probably not pushing 300, and finds the end zone with no interceptions. Do you think the defense can return to form, though? We talked about earlier how they were so dominant against Virginia. They were dominant against Austin Peay, and they had a good second half against Florida. But in that first half, they couldn't really get their footing. They couldn't get going. Do you expect this to be the defense from the first 2 games that shows up and UTSA just kind of runs out of answers pretty quickly on the offensive end? Or do you think this is a Tennessee defense that maybe falls back down to earth and we should expect more of what we saw against Florida?
Yeah, you would certainly hope that it is a response game for those guys, because like you said, a lot of positive momentum going into that Florida game. We were in week 3 and we were saying the defense has been the best part of the team, the most consistent part of the team. And like you said, they were brought down to earth in that Florida game. The concern, I don't know if concern is the right word, but we talked about it a lot. It was kind of an asterisk next to those stats against Virginia and Austin Peay that, okay, we knew who the opponent was. Let's see how they do against Florida. And they didn't – I wouldn't say fail that test, because they played well in the second half. But I do like them to kind of return to that form this week. UTSA is tied 79th nationally in sacks allowed. I think they've allowed 7 this year. Florida had allowed quite a bit as well going into that game, and Tennessee wasn't able to affect the quarterback as much. Did get some pressure on Mertz sometimes, but I do like that. I think a big factor this week too, and we haven't heard anything on it, at least at this point, is the quarterback situation at UTSA. That their start has been a little bit unexpected as well, with Frank Harris out. I don't know what their situation will be like this week, but I do like them to get back there to affect the quarterback, get back to making some tackles for loss, and then take an element out of the game. I don't really know what UTSA's bread and butter has been to this point. We watched a little bit of them Friday night against Army, and I watched a little bit of them against Houston in week 1. But I do like the Tennessee defense to respond well and kind of get back to doing what they did the first 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think that it'll be a good bounce-back game for Tennessee. I think James Pierce Jr. could kind of get his name back into the spotlight a little bit with the sack or 2. I think Tyler Barron could also be a guy that ends up with a really nice game. And then, of course, Aaron Beasley he's been everywhere in all 3 games, another guy that I think could have a really good showing. But I think that Tennessee will be able to kind of shut down UTSA enough where Tennessee can build an early lead and not coast to victory like you would against an FCS opponent, or at least you would hope you would against an FCS opponent. But UTSA is a good team, FBS team, and I think that that's going to be tough for or let me say I think that'll be a game that Tennessee could control early on the defensive side. And I think that's one that we'll see, even though it is not a give-me game, but a weaker opponent than some SEC foes is what I should say. But let's wrap it up with 2 last quick things. Who's your MVP for this game?
Man, I think I'm going to go defense on this one, because we both agree it's going to be a bounce-back game. I think any one of those guys up front that have played really well. I will say Tyler Barron. I know you just mentioned him. I like Tyler Barron. I really do like this team to get back to affecting the QB and looking the way they did in the first 2 weeks. I think you could pick any one of those guys, especially given UTSA's kind of inability to protect the quarterback to this point. But I'm going to go with Tyler Barron to get a couple sacks in there and kind of get back to form. And again, if you're a Tennessee fan and this coaching staff too, they talked a little bit about it Saturday night after that loss, how the team was going to regroup. Maybe that's, your typical coach speak that just kind of that the players are adopting as well after a loss. But I mean, you hope to see it. You really hope to see it. This is a solid, group of 5 team that you're playing again, a team that people kind of circled on the calendar as a trap game for Tennessee. We didn't think so, as some UTSA fans, pointed out, but, we'll kind of see on Saturday. And you want to, it's a little break from SEC play after that loss. You want to have a really good response. I like the defense to do it. I like Tyler Barron to lead the way.
I'll go with Jalen Wright at running back. I think it's another game where he could look at his yards per carry at the end, and it's something close to a first down. Just another really productive day from him. Like I said earlier, I think it's another game where Tennessee's going to try to get rolling in the run game. Of course, you want to let Milton throw it. You want to let him kind of start to figure those things out. But it is the bread and butter of Tennessee's offense, is getting that ground game going to open up everything else. So I think Jalen Wright's going to see a lot of touches. I think he's going to get a lot of carries and end up with a really solid night and probably find the end zone at least once as well. So I'll go Jalen Wright for my MVP. I think we both agree that Tennessee's going to win this game against UTSA. But I want to take it a step further. Tennessee beat Austin Peay, but it didn't feel good afterward.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like a win. It almost felt like a loss in some ways because of the level of play Tennessee played at. When you're walking out of Neyland Stadium on Saturday night, do you expect a similar feeling of Tennessee won, but it wasn't satisfying? It wasn't the type of win you wanted to see? Or do you think this is going to be a win where Tennessee fans leave and they feel better about this season and confident heading into South Carolina?
Yeah, I think it's going to be one they feel better about, and it's going to have to be for at least the perception right now, because that Florida game changes everything. I mean, you go down to Gainesville, you win, you come out sluggish against UTSA, and you squeak by. I think you're fine with that because you're like, okay, again, a solid UTSA team. We're 1-0 in the SEC. Still some things clean up, but we're feeling good going into South Carolina the following week. That Florida game changes stuff because now you come off that loss and you want to click on all cylinders. You want to go out there. I'm not saying there's not going to be mistakes still, because I don't see a complete 180 in 1 week with this offense and some of the issues we saw on Saturday. But I do think it's going to be a game where you come out and you do feel better about that. You do see some things cleaned up. You do see some plays hit downfield, more consistent drives, picking up first downs on third down, things like that. And then the defense as well, playing well. So I do like that to be a game where Tennessee leaves and feels maybe in better shape than they did Saturday night, and then 2 Saturdays ago against Austin Peay, like you said.
Yeah, I think it'll be somewhere in the middle. It's a little bit of a cop-out of an answer, but I don't think Tennessee's going to come out of that thinking, yeah, we're back, like South Carolina, watch out. But I also don't think that Tennessee's going to come out of it feeling like a loss again. And I think that that'll be good enough, and you'll feel confident enough in the win that there'll be a celebration at the end in some ways. Because after the Austin Peay game, there wasn't a feel of a celebration after it. There's a feel of disappointment. I don't think it'll go that far that it'll feel like that. But I don't also necessarily think that it'll maybe cover up what happened in Gainesville. So I'll say somewhere in the middle. Well, of course, we'll give our full score predictions at the end of the week. So make sure you head over to VolReport.com to check that out. But really quickly, we have some breaking news while we are doing this show. For transparency, we are doing this on Monday night. This will be posted on Tuesday morning, but the SEC just handed down punishments for the altercation at the end of the Tennessee-Florida game. Looking through it, we have 3 Florida players and 1 Tennessee player suspended for the first half of their next games for flagrant unsportsmanlike actions in the aftermath of the Florida at Tennessee football game on Saturday night in Gainesville. The suspensions were determined after video review and consultation between the Southeastern Conference Office, the University of Florida, and the University of Tennessee. For Florida, it's offensive lineman Damian George Jr., offensive lineman Micah Maskua, I could be pronouncing that wrong, and tight end Dante Zanders. For Tennessee, the only suspended player from the altercation will be Omar Norman Lott, transfer from Arizona State, who has come in and been really solid for Tennessee on the defensive front. Will have to miss that first half against UTSA. He'll be back in the fold for the second half. But that does mean that we'll see a little bit of a different rotation for that first half on the defensive line. Doesn't appear Elijah Simmons is trending towards being healthy. Just haven't gotten that vibe. Not 100% sure yet. But Next to Omari Thomas, who at first it looked like he would be suspended as well for the targeting call at the end of the game. Of course, that got reversed. He'll be a starter, and then maybe a Bryson Eason or Karat Garland. We'll have to see exactly who comes in and plays defensive tackle for Tennessee. But for that first half, no Omar Norman Lott. So we'll end it on that note, though. Make sure you head over to VolReport.com for all of our content and subscribe to the YouTube channel right here, as we will have the press conferences throughout the week posted. We will have more VolReport Show content on the way, talking with UTSA's rival site and getting the scoop on the Roadrunners, as well as Noah and I's breakdown after all the press conferences. And then, of course, on game day, we'll be here as well. So subscribe to the YouTube channel, head over to VolReport.com. Everything you need is in the description, and thank you for watching.